Good evening and welcome to Zion's Banner. I was just testing things, making sure everything worked. You should have seen a different feature on the opening. One of the things that the new Restream allows is for you to set goals. And so I did. And so you probably saw a little bar up there. The goal being in the next month to see if I can end up with 6 new subscribers. So if you're new to the room and you haven't hit subscribe, hit the subscribe bell. Now, if God does that, of course, I'll change the goal. But I figured it was good to go ahead and try that out and put some goals in front and then see if God ends up reaching them. I'm thrilled with the community we have, but it would be a blessing to see that community grow, would it not? And so this is a way of kind of putting that before us and seeing what God's going to do. Now, God may just want to keep us where we're at for those 28 days, or may want to do something else. But you know, he could also increase views. He could also increase a lot of things. But I thought that I would definitely put that before him. And so it would be good to go ahead and see where that goes, knowing that God has many ways of blessing, even through you guys, and being able, you might be able to touch a life through one of these broadcasts, or share something, or run into somebody with that objection. So that's kind of where we're at. I want to start putting some things out there and watching God work. So this was an opportunity, because of the way Restream is set up, to go ahead and do that very thing. And I thought I would go ahead and do that. Now we're in Matthew, and so I'm going to switch us over. Now again, I want to make people aware that next week we have a special guest, Pastor Jordan Bradley. I'm going to let you in on a secret. It's my future son-in-law too. But he's done an interesting thing. He did a program on something I haven't done, which was cultural Marxism. And I thought, you know, I'm not in the pulpit in a pastoral role. It might be neat because he's combining his pastoral ministry with some apologetics. And then there's some neat history to share here. And so when I see pastors start to take an interest in apologetics and use it from the pulpit, I get excited. And so that's why we're doing that. Now that means switching things out, just to let folks know. We're going to be switching things out so that Matthew will be on the Wednesday. Just to let you know that. Matthew will be on the Wednesday. And so Thursday will be in apologetics, but we're going to deal with cultural Marxism. We're going to talk back and forth. I'm going to have him on either through Zoom or Restream. By the way, both Zoom and Restream will allow you to come on and ask him the questions. And I will post the link either way. So this will give you an opportunity to come on and ask questions in person. Do realize that my computer is limited. And so I can only have 10 people do that at once. So if you see that there are too many people, then you're going to have to be a little patient about waiting. It's just a small room. And so here's the thing. We're going to try that next week and see how that goes. And I'm just debating which way I'm going to do it. So be praying that, like, the high speed will hold for us and we can make this work. I'm excited. And that's where things are indeed going. So, thanks out to Elizabeth, who's creating a meme. All of you guys are great. I see a lot of those blue wrenches, so there are a lot of mods in the audience tonight. But that is really cool. We're going to get started, but just wanted to remind you of that change. So you're going to see someone with a bigger beard than me with a lighter beard. See, that's something I have to admire too. So let's go to the split screen. Here we go. The split screen brings us to tonight's message. And so I'm going to move this over the Restream. and pay a little bit more attention to the window up here, and kind of shift things around a little on my screen, get us all comfortable here. And you should be seeing the split screen any second now. There is a delay. Restream is actually streaming this to 3 places. By the way, just for your information, as I am streaming to Periscope, guess who's tuned in a few times? Adhere Apologetics has tuned into the simultaneous broadcast of this on Periscope. So I'm terribly excited about that. And we may have some YouTubers. With the chat box, you too can go ahead and chat and get online. So we are going to deal with, how does Matthew indicate Jesus' wider mission? Jesus and the Gentile woman. So you're going to be turning your Bibles. But before you do, what do we always have? We have our Nash of Hebrew. And so while you're turning your Bibles to Matthew, you can get ready for the Nash of Hebrew, which is tied to Matthew, because I always try to take a word connected to a Hebrew word from the passage. So that gives you time to go ahead and deal with... we're in Matthew 15, 21 and on. Let's get into our Nash of Hebrew. You're going to see how the Nash of Hebrew works with the Greek passage. Because yes, your New Testament wasn't written in Greek, but your Septuagint acts like a Rosetta Stone. So we can have some fun. We are going to deal with a really, really, really hard Hebrew stem, which I don't really want to try. But it's hard because it is 3 letters, and 2 of them are considered what are called weak letters. It's the word to bow down. And it doesn't usually appear in that form. So if you were to try and find this word in this form, you wouldn't find it, because it uses a different stem. Remember what I told you, the stems have to do with the way the verbal idea is conveyed. It's the way Semitic languages and Hebrew work. So, just to let you know, it's the idea of bowing down, and it's used in the Hithpiel stem. So I remember it as ishtachavu. Okay? That's the word that comes to mind. That's the form of the word that immediately comes to mind, yishtakavu. And it has the idea of worship, and it appears in the stem that is reflexive. All right? And I don't want to get too far into Hebrew, but why did I do this? Because the word proskeneo is going to appear in the passage. And that's the way this word is represented in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures. So when you see proskeneo, it actually goes back to this Hebrew word. And let's have some fun with this. Let's use an example of this. Okay? This is an example. And you see the word in one of its forms, and you notice the shtach, well, it's nish tache ve in this particular form, but it's used in Genesis 22:5. Abraham says to the young men, those are the young men that went with him when him and Isaac went to sacrifice. Isaac didn't know that at that time his father was told that he was the sacrifice. Now, God had other plans, but as far as Abraham knows now, he's really going to end up sacrificing Isaac. And he says to the 2 young men he had come with him, stay here with the donkey. The lad and I will go yonder and worship Venish tach chave, from that word to bow down, and we will come back to you. And so in the Septuagint, that word worship is proskeneo in some form. And so there's your Nash of Hebrew. Now, the hard part with this Nash of Hebrew is, unlike some of the other words, you're not going to run around the house going yishtachavu. It's a hard word to remember. It's hard to pronounce because of the guttural. So unlike some of our other Hebrew words where you could just put them into your vocabulary, this one's a little harder, okay? But now, if you were reading Genesis, you can see what that word really looks like. And we will bow, we will worship. All right? And so that's the word we've got for today, which ties us into the passage. Let's get into tonight's passage and talk a little bit about it. Now, this is going to be a little controversial. Actually, if one or two of our friends from last night were here, they would probably wonder about this passage. It did come up as far as the place of the Jewish people, and Matthew's going to deal a little bit with hinting about the relationship between God's kingdom, the Jewish people, and the way the nations are going to be included. And so he's going to go ahead and do that. And that's why this is here. When you come to a Bible passage, one of the first questions that you should probably ask as you're reading the story is, why did the author put this in given the audience that was going to read it? See, we're reading it, but we are not the original audience. So what is Matthew putting this in for, given the very Jewish audience he intends to affect? And see, that gives you more of the authorial intent and forces you to look at the background and the passage. So let's dig in and get going. This woman is marked as Sappho Phoenician or Canaanite. Some versions may actually have Sardonian. All right. And so Matthew indicates that Jesus has gone ahead and he's moved on. And when he goes ahead and he moves on, he goes and he departs to the region of Tyre and Sidon, which were to the north of Israel. And we read about Tyre in Ezekiel and Sidon. And so he actually goes into very Gentile territory. This is near the coastal plain, the original people, where Philistines were connected with this, and we connect the Phoenicians with this area. And so this woman, he goes to this area, and behold, a woman of Canaan came from that region and cried out to him, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely demon-possessed." But he answered her not a word, and the disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away. She cries after us." And so there's the woman's plea. A Canaanite woman? Yeah, really. Now understand how weird this is. Matthew's writing a Jewish audience. The feeling and relationship between Jews and the nations was not necessarily a very positive one. In fact, I almost wanted to title this Jesus and the Shiksa. It's a term in Yiddish for a Gentile woman, but it isn't always used very kindly. And so I thought, no, in fact, this passage is going to speak against is going to talk about the inclusive side of Jesus's mission as far as the nations. And so I thought, that title might be an eye catcher, but it really portrays the spirit of the passage. And so I don't want to do that. Matthew's deliberately pointing out that this woman's an outsider. She's a Canaanite. In fact, Richard Franz really grabs this idea and says Matthew sharpens the issue. The Canaanites were the traditional enemies of Israel. And so this is not a woman who would normally have friendly relations historically with Israel, and thus not historically with Israel's true king. And Matthew really goes to trouble to kind of put that out there because of his reason for doing this entire story. The stories in your Gospels are deliberately chosen. Now, yes, Jesus did them, but they're arranged and they're chosen in such a way as to get a message across. That's why we have 4 gospels. We don't have 4 gospels in the sense of 4 gospel messages. We have 4 different portraits of the same gospel message, and they're very tailored and they're very deliberate on the part of the authors. She is not pleading for herself. Now, that's an important point. She doesn't want to become rich for herself or wealthy for herself, but she's not asking anything for herself. She's asking it for her daughter. So this is a mom whose heart's breaking over her daughter. And so she's making this plea. She has, I don't know who she left her daughter with, but she is desperately wants her daughter freed from this horrible condition of demon possession. The second thing you'll note is she refers to him as son of David. This will become important later on, but it's not an accident that she makes her plea in terms of son of David, have mercy on me. And this is especially important given that she is a Canaanite woman. Now, Jesus' response, you would think, was, wide open arms and just come and just, yes, your daughter is cured. And that's what you would expect. Jesus' initial response is to answer her not a word. He doesn't even acknowledge her plea. I mean, this is shocking in terms of some of the pictures of Jesus that are legitimate if you don't understand what Matthew's doing, but it's definitely shocking in our day and age. I mean, ethnic relations are a big thing right now, and social justice. And does Jesus immediately answer this woman? And he doesn't. And now his disciples jump in. This is unseemly, okay, in that culture. Now, understand the culture at the time. It was not appropriate for men to have women running around and chasing them. This was not society. Now, this is a Mideastern society. And so the fact that she is continuing to hound him, she's calling attention, but uncomfortable attention, to the disciples and to Jesus. And the disciples are struggling. Everyone's watching this. This could look really, really bad. Now, I'm not saying the disciples were merely, individuals who didn't care about anything except, social status, but they are affected by the things going around them, and they know the society around them. And they say, send her away. Tell her to go away, for she cries after us. And he's going to go ahead and deal with this. I'm going to deal with the second part of his answer because there's a progression going on in the conversation here. And we don't want to miss the progression. Why is Matthew including this? Why this awkward scene that a Jewish audience is going to be reading? Why are you doing this, Matthew? This is going to be uncomfortable for the sensibilities of some of the people that you're trying to reach. Matthew is hinting at something. He includes this in relationship to Jesus's wider mission in the future. But right now, Jesus is still presenting himself to the nation of Israel as part of bringing in of the kingdom of God. And so understand what's happening here. Matthew is creating something that he will go back to. It's almost like watching the mystery movie, and there you go, there's the clue. It's an insignificant, it's not a like in-your-face clue, but it's a clue left that's going to get picked up later on in the story. Okay? Now, we don't know exactly why Jesus holds back completely. I mean, I cannot enter into the mind of the Lord. I can discern the authorial intent of Matthew, but there are a lot of reasons Jesus could be holding up. One is to see her at the level of her faith. I mean, she's a Canaanite woman. She's not from a group of people that have spent their history for a great length of time worshiping the one true God. How serious is this woman? Is she She desperate to be relieved, or is she desperate to believe? Did you hear what I said there? Because I love those turns of phrases when I get to use them. Is she desperate to believe or desperate to be relieved? There's a big difference between the two. Some people want to be relieved, but they don't want to believe. So we need to pay attention to that. And Jesus might be ascertaining and making clear the heart of this woman. Matthew doesn't tell us, so I can't make dogmatic. Okay, if I was doing this as a sermon, I would say that Matthew may be doing this, but in the course of this sermon, I cannot absolutely tell you dogmatically and doctrinally he is. It is a reasonable understanding given Matthew's purpose. Okay? Jesus will commend her faith against the backdrop of this initial silence. Okay? Who sends her away? Now, Jesus ignores her, but he never sends her away. You notice that? It's the disciples. They're complaining. They're the ones complaining. This is going to act as an interesting backdrop for them to learn a lesson too. There's some great comments in the chat. We will have to go back. But it's interesting to me that the people and the disciples always go back to their master. Why did they say, you go away? You have to understand the structure. These are the disciples of the great rabbi. The rabbi is the authority, and Jesus is the authority as the son of David. So they don't take matters into their own hands. They defer to the authority. These societies, in fact, Jewish society still has a hierarchicalism to it. And this was the rabbinical school approach. So the disciples of Hillel or Shammai would immediately defer. And so that's kind of important to pay attention to. And so we don't want to ignore that. And so we just want to, put that in there. Let's keep moving. Okay. Now, Jesus' second answer is very important. And so we want to pay attention to this. Your screen will change a little more slowly. We're in Matthew 15:24. Now, when he finally does answer her, he still doesn't give an affirmative response. He answers and said, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Now, Hebrew Israelites will abuse this verse. Okay? They will abuse this verse and do things with it it's not there for. It does serve a legitimate purpose, but not the purpose they think it serves. Okay? He is, in the Greek, fairly strongly making the point that his mission at this point is directed to Israel only. He says that his mission is directed to Israel, but he never infers that this is a permanent condition. And I'm going to argue that later on, Matthew is going to make very clear about the nature of this. But it is pretty clear in this passage, and we have to deal with the passage honestly. Uk epistolin ein me in the Greek, and he's very clear about this, but the inference that this is a permanent condition is not what Matthew intends. So then we have to ask, why does Jesus do that? But first we have to deal with an objection, because Muslim polemicists will point this out as a contradiction to the Great Commission. They will say, look, Jesus says he's only sent to the house of Israel, but then you have the Great Commission. We now have proof that your New Testament scriptures are corrupted because they contradict themselves. And by the way, that should say 28, not 18. So I don't know why that's appearing that way. Timing is everything. Matthew is writing this within the framework of Jesus's mission at that time, prior to his crucifixion and resurrection, while the kingdom is still being offered nationally to Israel. Good question. I think the 12 apostles are in they're definitely headed in the right track to be right with God. John Williams was asking, I would say the 12 apostles are Israel, and they represent the remnant, and I think they're okay. I can't, all definitely doesn't seem to mean 11 of the 12 apostles. We know Judas is a problem, but there are 11 guys that are gonna hang out, and I think they're okay, and they're part of Israel. Romans 11 indicates there's a remnant of Israel, and then there's an unbelieving majority, and Paul points back to Kings and the incident of Elijah to say this is nothing new. In fact, one of Israel's most apostate periods, and says, guess what? Paul says, guess what? What was happening back then is very similar to what's happening now. So that's the best way I can answer that, and that's a good question. So the apostles are Israel, so I guess if you subtract those 11 guys, you can't say all as being exclusively every one. In fact, that's exactly where we're going with the timing is everything. So that's a perfect segue. Certainly then they stumbled that they should fall completely. I will get back to the comments in the thing, but occasionally that's kind of what the Q&A after is a little bit more for. That's just to keep a continuity, especially if we're in a passage. When you're teaching or preaching a passage, you want to keep the continuity of the passage to a certain extent. This is an issue that comes up particularly with Muslims, and I think it is important because the Bible doesn't contradict itself, and I don't want Muslims thinking that it does. What's going on with the timing here is what you can use to answer your Muslim friend. When Jesus makes that statement, he's in a certain place in the timing of his ministry and mission. So let's see if we can understand the timing of Jesus's ministry and mission in terms of that passage. What's going on with the timing? Why is Matthew 28 different than Matthew 15? Something's going on here. There's some events that occur between Matthew 15 and Matthew 28. Paul says, I say then, did they stumble that they should fall? Certainly not. But through their fall, to provoke them to jealousy, salvation has come to the Gentiles. Now, if their fall is riches for the world, and their failure riches for the Gentiles, how much more their fullness? Now, Paul's making a very important point here in Romans. He's saying that there's kind of a timing thing going on here. Okay, originally God worked through Israel as a witness nation. Their rejection of the gospel has a dramatic effect. Okay, I went to Douglas Moo, no small scholar, a scholar of note. I've read some of Moo's stuff. He's written a lot of stuff. It happens via an immediate stage, salvation of the Gentiles. Jewish refusal to respond to the gospel, Paul implies, has opened the way for the preaching to the Gentiles, a circumstance which Paul witnessed repeatedly in his own missionary work. And so there's a timing here. In 15 of Matthew, Jesus is still offering the kingdom to Israel. In 28 of Matthew, that initial offer was rejected, and Jesus gives a commission to go into all the nations directly, so that Israel is not the means that God is working through to bring the world to himself. He's now going to work through this kohel, this community that he's creating. Okay? And so That's what's kind of going on here. So to my Muslim polemicist, I say, well, tune in a little later on. This isn't a contradiction. This is where Jesus is at in his mission. And this is what he is doing now. And he answers the lady based on the fact that the kingdom has to be offered corporately and nationally to Israel first. God, who knows all things, knew what would happen with that offer. Okay? And so that's the point I'm making in the next slide. The refusal of Israel corporately, notice I said corporately, to respond to the gospel opened the way for God to go directly to the nations with the exact same message. So there is no contradiction. In fact, what Matthew is doing is setting the stage for the Great Commission in 28 in chapter 15. And that's literally what he's doing. At this point, the Gentile mission has not been fully inaugurated, or has not been inaugurated. And so that's why his response to the woman. And so he's not being cruel. He's acting under the orders and timing that the Father himself had set. Now, she could have went away in a huff. She could have went away in a huff and said, I've had it with you. You're no help. She could have went away just dejected. Okay, they've sent me away, and hung her head in shame and went back to her daughter and was totally lost. Okay. Her response isn't that. And I do see some good comments. We'll chime in on them. But I do want to respond to her because her response is so radical. I mean, how do we feel when we're told we can't have something? I mean, what's our first impulse? Like we kind of get on our high horse, or if we're really discouraged about it, we really get kind of down, don't we? I know I get down. I mean, anger and disappointment are like the first two things. And that's what you'd expect from the woman. Her response is one of humble worship and acceptance of what Jesus is saying. Now, that's very important. Don't lose that at all. That's terribly important. Proskuneo is used here, which means she's worshiping him, which means she recognizes him as not a mere man. When I hear people say that Jesus didn't believe he was God, proskuneo is used. And I don't think it's just a courtesy here. So she worships and she accepts his response, which took some real humility on her part. And that's why I went to proskuneo, and that's why we looked at ishtachavu tonight. Okay? And bowing there was a posture. Now understand, and I do lose this a little, and we've lost this in the American church a little bit. People used to express their emotions with their bodies. Okay, the soul got expressed through the body. And so that's why you saw these prayer postures, and to bow was an act of allegiance or worship or reverence. And so you're going to see that sort of conduct in the Mideast and in the East. We Americans don't really have a posture of respect. That's a particular bodily posture where I align myself a certain way. I think some of it is the idea that we don't really regard station much. Even in England and other countries. Now, the good news is we affirm the worth of every individual. Okay? The bad news is we sometimes dishonor where honor should be given. And so that's my say on that say. But that's proskuneo. I found it interesting that there was a connection to the High German Kus, although in different ways. I was like, it's interesting that this should find its way in there. The Greeks used to use it for adoration of the gods, but we know that that is not quite that way. Veneration of the God of Israel does play an important part in this, and we see that with Abraham. Now let's deal with a little bit of a parabolic saying here, and then we will get back to the chat towards the end here, because this saying is a little weird here. I mean, how would a liberal, somebody who is very social justice conscious, look at this? This response is pretty intense. Okay, I mean, ooh, it's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. What is going on here? I mean, I could offend some people with this sort of thing. Jesus didn't mind being offensive in some ways. And so he throws this at her. I want to let you know that it's not the word wild dogs. Okay, I want to be a little careful here. There is a notation, and I think it is significant. Jesus had two words he could have used. He uses what's called the diminutive, or the softer term. Wow, I'm trying to think, because we don't do much with the diminutive much, like other languages. More affectionate, softer or smaller word for something. And the word here is little dogs, almost like house dogs, as opposed to wild dogs. And the metaphor recognizes the distinction God demands between Jews and Gentiles. Now, this distinction has been broken down. This is what the middle wall's about. But there was a distinction because of a historic privilege that Israel enjoyed. Someone asked puppy, and that's what came to mind. So, thanks. And just to go ahead, shout out to John. Puppy probably could be used. It's the difference between Av and Abba. Okay, father and daddy. One is a diminutive of the other. The purpose in Jesus doing this is not that Jesus was bigoted. Okay, Jesus is trying to put forward the idea that yes, Israel has enjoyed a historic privilege that is worked out in history, okay? And he's dealing with the order of things. Mark 7 interprets the saying, the children of the house must be satisfied first, a proton. That's kind of the feel we get from John. I didn't point this out. Otto Michael in Kittle's Theological Dictionary of the New Testament points out the structure of John. And the answer shows obedience to the will of God. She recognizes the prerogative of Israel. Now remember, this prerogative is not based on value. It's based on historic promises. And so God has made covenants, and he's chosen certain people and things for certain functions. That's why he could call Cyrus in Isaiah his anointed. Not because Cyrus was the nicest pagan king in the universe. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. But Cyrus was set by God to fulfill a certain historic purpose. And so in that sense, he is God's anointed or God's chosen to fulfill that purpose. Cyrus, my elect. And so there is an elect purpose involved here. And that purpose is worked out, and she recognizes the prerogative of Israel. Now that's incredible. So we have to understand that if Jesus had wanted to be cruel, he could have used the nastier term for dog. Okay? He is seeking to be gentle, but he's seeking to be accurate. And Jesus is recognizing the order of events, that he needs to finish his mission with the nation of Israel in offering them the kingdom before the Gentile mission can fully get underway. And so this is not bigotry. This is the working out of God's purposes. And that's what Jesus is pointing to. She recognizes that God had a covenant relationship to Israel prior to the nation. Okay? She shows proper respect. Now, proper respect takes into mind a person's station and their purpose. Okay, so Mr. Ambassador is a way of recognizing that person holds the station of ambassador, which gives him certain prerogatives that I do not have. And that's why that's there. And so that's why I went ahead and kind of pointed this out. And it's fitting. When I used to walk around and Dr. John Whitcomb walked into the room, it was appropriate in terms of his station, his experience, his training, and his ministry to acknowledge a level of honor. Jesus also recognizes her great faith in him as the Messiah and her recognition for the God of Israel. I mean, son of David. Son of David according to who? Son of David by what? And on that basis, he grants her request regardless of the order of events. In other words, even though the Gentile mission is not fully underway, Jesus is going to step out of the natural order of what is going on at the time and actually grant her request. So even though he could stick with the order of offering to the nation of Israel first and not dealing with her because the Gentile mission was underway, Jesus does not do that. Now, on what basis? Well, there is compassion there, but there's something else at work. She's demonstrated her faith. She's demonstrated her faith in obedience and accepting what he said to her instead of discouragement or anger. All right? And she's demonstrated her faith in referring to him as the Son of David, which is a messianic title. So you have this pagan woman acknowledging God, acknowledging Jesus' messiahship, and humbly accepting, demonstrating an incredible level of humility. And so Jesus steps out of the natural order of where his mission's at and grants her her request. I mean, that's an incredible thing here. Okay? Now, I know we're a little early, but we've got some time to go back to some comments, which is really great, and look at them. I'm going to go ahead and say this, okay? Jesus' take-home truth still has a special role for Israel to play. But Jesus' messianic reign is over all nations, so we can trust him with our lives as the high and good king. And I'm using that term in the sort of Middle Ages. I was part of a medieval recreation society in college, and we still like to go to Ren fairs. And the high king was the king over the other barons or lesser kings in a territory. And since Jesus' messianic reign extends over the nations, it extends over us, and we can trust him as the good king. He's got the authority to get done what needs to be done in our lives, because he is the good and high king. Yes, there is still a role for Israel, but Jesus' reign is not restricted to Israel, and we can trust him with our lives. So now I'm going to pull up and I'm going to go to our little section here where I can go back and I can look at cool things that have been said and done. To do that, I've got to go back to my little OBS thing here, and every so often. Okay, we will go and we will put the chat up. There we go. All right. I'm going to try the chat with Restream and see if it looks better. Alrighty. Was working earlier. We'll just do it this way. There we go. Fortunately, OBS allows it either. I really would like the Restream to work. And I don't know why that's doing that. So I'm going to pull this for a second and figure out what's going on. And I'm just going to try to really test the properties just one more time and figure out what the story is. All right. The importance of Restream to me is I can pull everyone's comments up. But the bad news with Restream is that it seems to be not embedding as well as I would like. So I don't understand that. But I'm going to give it one more quick shot and put that back in and try to figure out why that's doing that. And then I'll let it be. But this is just my desire to make it work. Oh well. There's the chat. Let's go back through and look at some of the things we were looking at. I'm just pulling up some of the comments there. All righty. Huh. All right. So there we are. Looking over anything else that's there just to kind of see what I can do. There was one comment. It was related to Acts 11, where the disciples continued to preach to the Jews only. And that's true, they did. And God had to literally scatter them. That's why he's scattering them out of Jerusalem. And they don't get the idea until Paul. And God has to make it a little clearer to them because they're not really getting it. But they should have gotten it. And so that's kind of the problem. They're a little slow to pick up on the Gentile side of the mission. And so that's why that kind of happens. I've got a comment like Ezekiel, but I don't quite know in what way like Ezekiel. So I'm a little lost there. But if someone clarifies, that'll be great. That's Ramon. I'm not disagreeing. I'm just didn't know what to connect it to. So that's just me. Legitimate comment? Yes. The ones with the oracles need to be shown the light. And Jewish people desperately need that. So. Hey, someone else joined us. So that is great. I'm just going to say hi. It's excellent. Okay. And good sharing of scripture. So that is good. I always love to see scripture being shared. The kingdom is in mind, Isaiah 11. And so that is wonderful. Okay. Okay, someone's pointing out that Ezekiel illustrated his messages by actually acting them out. And that's true. And even body posture is important in that part of the world. Now, if you haven't hit the like button, please remember to do that. Um, D would make an excellent moderator. I keep wondering. He probably would. Ha ha ha. You guys are just too much fun. Someone was making a little joke. MOA, moderator of, nah, I don't know. So there's still a few abbreviations I'm learning my way around. So I'm not quite sure. Why? I'm just switching for a second. I'm not quite sure why that isn't doing what it's supposed to do. Because I should be able to embed, but okay. Any other questions or comments? Wait a minute. I'm just seeing Daniel 9. Okay, yes, someone was pointing to the prostrated position. And at some point, I'm going to figure out why that does what it does. But because my hope is that eventually we can have people, from other areas pull in here, and the chat box should indeed appear, and it seems to disappear. So, oh, MOA. Someone's making reference to. Someone thinks that Dinu is related to Ruth of the Bible. So, and they're just having some fun. So you guys hang around just enough that you're starting to form your own inside jokes, which is really pretty cool. Okay. Hey, since I'm going to be closing in prayer, does anyone want to list some prayer requests? I know that's a little odd, but maybe it's just something we can do. I don't get to talk to you guys as regularly. And it will be fun when we start doing some stuff maybe where you can come on and ask your questions. So we're going to try that next week. Okay. Seeing nothing. I mean, if there are any related questions, we know why Matthew does this now. By the way, you will notice the link to the PowerPoint. It did not end up being posted on the Facebook correctly today. And so you can click that link and you can have the PowerPoint from tonight. Our nation. Okay. I will definitely close by praying for our nation. Wow. Just got a sore back. Scoliosis. Okay. So I got two, our nation and scoliosis, which are not related, by the way. So I'm not inferring that our nation has a curvature of the back. That's just to make that clear. Okay. Well, thanks for those. I'm going to close us in prayer. And then we'll go from there unless, wait a minute. I'm just making sure that I didn't miss something. Okay. Lord, thank you so much for the time we could have together. Thank you that Matthew is hinting in 15 about what Jesus is going to make clear in chapter 28:19 through the end of the chapter, that we are to go to all the ethnic groups. That's the Greek word is ethnos. And we are to preach the wonderful message of forgiveness, the message by which God came into our earth and started the process of reclaiming that which was fallen, fixing that which was broken, and destroying the works of the devil, the rebellion. Thank you that he has sent us out as ambassadors. We do have a title. We do have a role. We uniquely fulfill that role in different ways, and we do have a position that he has extended to us. If there is anyone watching this or is going to be watching this, and I hope it does get out all over, I pray that if they don't know you, they would consider well Jesus's a person and his work and the gospel and what it provides, and that they would leave behind the fallen system of the world and join the kingdom that is here and is coming, that is now and not yet, that will be fully realized but has been inaugurated, that they will become a kingdom citizen, and they will give their allegiance to Jesus, King Jesus, the Son of David. And I pray that you would end up doing that for them. If there are others that tune in, may they get a greater appreciation for Matthew leaving this incredible hint in 15. May they understand Jesus' timing, and may they realize that Jesus' love doesn't mean that Jesus had to do everything the way we would do it. And that we need to trust him as our high and good king, who is over all the nations, and who has said, all authority is given to me in heaven and earth, and lo, I am with you, even to the end of the age. And so we can call on that authority in our lives and in our situation. Lord, we call on that authority as far as our nation, which desperately needs to feel the touch of Jesus, that needs healing. Lord, I don't know how that's going to happen. Sometimes the grace of the gospel shows best when dark clouds are there. Sometimes the backdrop of the light against the darkness is just what people need. And I don't want to forget Australia, Lord. Our nation isn't the only one facing things. And so I want to think about the fact that we have dear brothers and sisters who've actually tuned in from other countries. And I think of Australia, and I don't know what their particular needs are, but I know that they're being affected by the COVID virus, and there are other things going on. There are politics that I don't even understand. But I pray that you would undertake for them to allow your people to do your work and provide for them in this environment, whether it be Australia or the U.S., so that your kingdom can keep moving. Allow your word to go out. And allow us to see Jesus as he really is. Not just somebody who's pleasing everybody, but someone who's on his Father's business. Someone who continues to extend the kingdom which he shares with his Father even now. Lord, I think of my dear sister Elizabeth from Australia, and I think about the scoliosis of her back and the back pain. Our backs are amazingly complicated, incredible things that carry us around and allow us to move in really cool ways and do neat things. And when they're out of whack, everything that gets carried along is out of whack. We know that Paul uses the metaphor of the body, that if one part suffers, the whole body suffers. And he uses that metaphor because he himself knows that metaphor really works. And you know that metaphor works. So I pray that you would help her to, one, be able to position herself in such a way as to give that back the rest it needs. Two, to be able to do those things to strengthen her back that can be done. And three, that you would relieve the pain so that she can function the way you desire her to function for your glory. Extend the authority that you have as the good and high king over this situation. And we ask it in Jesus' name. All right. So, again, there is now a progress meter. May God add his blessings and bring us those 6 new subscriptions as we do some neat shows. By the way, in the future, there'll probably be some opportunities for you to see some team up between me and Anthony Rogers, but I will have to do that as premiere because that is George Saig's show. So thank you guys all for being here. And I really pray that I could get the bot to work the way it's supposed to work. So, because I really want all the chat up. The Restream chat box looks so cool. I mean, I'm glad we can do what we can do, but it'd be cool if I could do it just a little bit better. Okay. Thanks for tuning in last night. Next week, remember, Matthew is Wednesday. Special guest is Thursday. Link will be posted no matter how we do it. It'll probably be posted at the beginning of the show. You guys could come on, ask some questions, and say hi to Pastor Jordan. So thanks much. I'm going to start to, the chat will still be up.